Well, welcome all. It's 6:30, so we want to get started here. My name is Bruce Wiggins. I'm the chair of our Social Justice Council. Let me welcome you on behalf of the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee.
All right, good evening. So welcome to the Lieutenant Governor Candidate Forum for this evening. My name is Jamal Smith. I am the Racial Justice Community Engagement Manager for YWCA Southeast Wisconsin, as well as a proud member of African American Roundtable for Civic Engagement. This nonpartisan event is an opportunity for all of us to become better informed citizens and have a voice in the democratic process. All Lieutenant Governor candidates have been invited, and we are pleased to welcome Mandela Barnes and Kurt Kober, the two candidates who accepted our invitation. In Wisconsin, the role of Lieutenant Governor is very critical and important. In addition to being the first in line of succession, if the governor cannot fulfill their duties, the Lieutenant Governor works as an arm of the governor's office. The Lieutenant Governor can officially represent the governor to a statutory board, committee, or commission, and represent the governor to that board, committee, or commission. Just as significantly, the Lieutenant Governor works as an unofficial representative of the governor's office, pushing the agenda and helping the governor's office stay connected to communities across Wisconsin. This event is co-sponsored by the African American Roundtable, Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, Mothers Against Gun Violence, Progressive Moms of Wisconsin, the Social Justice Council of the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee, Voces de la Frontera, and Wisconsin Anti-Violence Effort Educational Fund. You can find resources and information about these organizations and others on the resource tables in the back. I would especially like to draw your attention to the WAVE volunteers in orange and gray shirts who are also doing who are registering voters. If you'd like to register or check the status of your voter registration, please talk to one of these registers. And it is also set up at the back table in the corner. If you would like to submit questions to the candidates, write your question on the provided question cards. Moms Demand Action volunteers in red shirts will be collecting cards and can provide additional question cards to anyone who needs one. We would like to extend special thanks to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee for donating this space, and Voces de la Frontera for providing Spanish language translation. We also have Ashley and Nancy in the back for those who may need that Spanish translation. They have the necessary equipment. For anyone who needs that, it is readily available. So before we get started, we have a few ground rules. Okay, we understand how these types of candidate forums can get intense, but we do have some guidelines first. For the audience, please silence all cell phones. So make sure that your phones are either on vibrate or on silent. For those of you who know that your vibration is louder than your ringer, you should probably put your phone on silent. Once the forum begins, we ask that there be no outburst, ask that you save your applause until the end, or any partisan activities. So there should be no shouting of any partisan activities or a representation of those of any partisan positions. The audience is expected to refrain from demonstrating for or against any candidate or response. Questions will be screened to avoid duplication. Any personal attacks on individuals or questions that are not relevant to the specific elected office will be removed. And for the candidates, the format will be the opening comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Each candidate will be allowed to answer every question if they so choose. Those questions, the answers to the questions will only be 2 minutes for each candidate, and the closing comments will be limited to 3 minutes again. So our volunteer timekeeper, who is Ms. Marquesa Tucker, part of the African American Roundtable, will be keeping time to make sure that we are staying on task, but yet being efficient in this conversation. Please stop when you see your time is over. Okay, so when we get to 0, don't add another point. Okay. Okay. So the candidates have both opted to be referred to by their first name, right? So based on the coin toss, Kurt will begin first with opening statements, and then each candidate will alternate who speaks first. So we will start with Mr. Kurt Kober.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight, first of all, on this toasty evening. There are other places you could probably be. And This topic is one of the most important topics we need to address, gun violence in our communities. And I'm looking forward to talking about how we solve for what is the reality for too many people in our state and our country today. Background on myself, what you see in front of you is the result of this Wisconsin progressive tradition. The Wisconsin progressive tradition that's been under attack for the last 8 years. I am the proud son of two parents that were union members. One of them is here tonight. My mom, Karen, is in the back of the room. I thank her for coming tonight. She was a school secretary at my high school, and my dad was a bus driver for the Sheboygan Transit System. Both union members, both had good-paying jobs, were able to provide for our family. And when my dad came down with multiple sclerosis, it was my mom's job and benefits from the state and the federal level that helped us push through. This is a progressive state. These are progressive values that invests in people and invests in communities. And this is under attack today. Our progressive state has entered into another dark chapter. We are seeing the subsidy of major corporations. We are seeing the choices that are used to be made in our communities made now in Madison. We are seeing that the fact that people aren't being listened to today. So I am running for lieutenant governor because that conversation needs to change. We need to have a new conversation in our state. And I'm running for lieutenant governor because the conversation we should be having is how we build strong communities again and how we build strong families again in this state. That's why I'm running for lieutenant governor. And what we see today is a lack of investment in our communities. And I want to change that. And I am a proud product of public schools from kindergarten through graduate school here in the state of Wisconsin. And my number one priority is investing in schools again. And not only returning the over $1.6 billion that's been bled from our public schools, but allowing communities to innovate what public education looks like, to make sure that public education works in every district around our state, not just a handful. And so I will be the number one champion for public education as your lieutenant governor. Secondly, we need to build a culture of entrepreneurship in our state because we need to build a fair economy. We don't have a fair economy in this state, and we've all seen it. We have communities melting away while other communities thrive. And that's why I believe we need to build a culture of entrepreneurship. We need to build an opportunity for everyone to jump off and start their own business, start their organization, or join one of those businesses or organizations. And finally, we need to make sure that communities thrive because they're safe and that we don't have this scourge that is gun violence. And I am committed to changing the conversation on that topic, just as the topics that I mentioned in education and economic opportunity in our state. This is the work that I'll do as Lieutenant Governor of the state of Wisconsin, and I'm looking forward to talking about this topic and a variety of others tonight. Thank you.
Mandela.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I am Mandela Barnes, running for Lieutenant Governor. I am a former state representative, served 2 terms in the Assembly. Recently, I worked for a group called State Innovation Exchange. I'm currently on leave. It's an organization that provides research and policy support to progressive state legislators across the country to help them lead with a vision, because ultimately that's what we need if we want to be successful this November, myself as a partisan candidate. And we don't win, we don't get our message across when we only talk about what the other side is doing wrong. And people living in the state of Wisconsin, we've had 8 years to know that things just are not working. People are not getting ahead. People are being left behind by politics. And with people's understanding about that, they still need hope. We still have to talk about our plan for opportunity. So I built my campaign around the essentials of opportunity. And I'll tell you why. It's because my grandfather, he moved to Milwaukee after serving in World War II, where he worked at A.O. Smith for over 40 years, like so many other people in this community. My father, he worked at his factory for over 30 years, and they both had family-sustaining jobs. But the reality now is that that shot at the middle class, that chance for success, does not exist for people of my generation. That is why we're the 10th most moved-from state in the country. People don't see Wisconsin as a place to live, work, and raise a family. So we have to expand and restore opportunity across this entire state, and it starts with equity in healthcare. It means that we take the Medicaid expansion. And on top of that, it means that we open the doors and create a public option for Badger Care so that people have a chance to buy affordable insurance. You know, right now we're paying twice as much as our neighbors in Minnesota for health insurance because of a political decision that the governor made. We cannot continue going down this road of making political decisions that are catered towards the 1% or that are catered towards large corporations who have written the rules in this state and in this country for far too long. we also have to get serious about education. I'm a proud product of Milwaukee Public Schools, and if you watch my video, I open up and I talk about being a product of 26 and Locust, which is the heart of the 53206 zip code. And I talk about that being the nation's or the state's poorest and the nation's most incarcerated zip code. These issues that I talk about during my campaign are very real life for me. It's not like I just picked up a newspaper and decided that these issues were important. These are things that I've lived, things that I've experienced. Throughout high school, I lost friends to gun violence, very unfortunately. I lost other friends to the criminal justice system. And to be honest, the last friend that I lost to gun violence was in February of this year. So when I talk about gun violence, it is from a very personal place. It's a reason why I ran to be a member of the Assembly. It's one of the reasons why I'm now running for Lieutenant Governor. But education, it starts with building communities, because there are no such thing as a failed school, only a failed community. We can't expect schools to perform at any other level than that of their surroundings. So when we have students who show up to school on empty stomachs, students who show up with certain... Stop. Oh, man. I had like 5 minutes to go. I had to fit that into the question-answer portion, the rest of my intro.
Somehow.
Yeah. My goodness.
Thank you, for both your opening comments. First question, and Mandela, you will go first. What should be done to protect water in our state? And this is a two-part question. What should be done to protect water in our state? And should mines be approved in the state of Wisconsin?
Thank you for that question. It's a very important one. First, it starts with a real Department of Natural Resources, and we don't have that right now. What we have now is an organization that denigrates natural resources. And I'm on the board of an organization called Midwest Environmental Advocates, and we actually work on a lot of water quality issues. This is work that I've been a part of and during my time in the legislature and my time outside of elected office. It's something I'll be involved with even if I'm not elected Lieutenant Governor. And we just filed a lawsuit to challenge the Foxconn water diversion permit. And to protect water is very important for a number of reasons. Obviously, we need water to live, but secondly, again, it goes back to the theme of corporations writing the rules, being able to control our natural resources. And with our natural resources, with our DNR secretary, that should be a position that's appointed by the Natural Resources Board, not a political appointee. That's why we got in the position that we're in. And my very first speech on the assembly floor was against iron mining in the state of Wisconsin. It is a very, very dangerous path, and it's also outdated. That is an economy of the past. Nobody's moving to the states. You're not going to attract millennials because of the mining industry. Anywhere you go in the state of Wisconsin or anywhere in this country, in Michigan, they're shutting down their mines left and right, the ones that do exist. So I have been against mining. I have the track record to prove that. I'm not just saying that in the middle of the campaign. I've not been endorsed by certain organizations because I've taken a strong position against mining, and I will continue that as Lieutenant Governor, because we have to look towards a more sustainable economy, which is in green infrastructure, which is in renewable energy. That's the path forward. We can look at our greatest threat, which is climate change, and we can do something about it and create jobs at the same time. Better paying jobs than mining, longer lasting jobs than mining. So I have been against, I will be against, and I am the candidate with any track record on working to address water quality issues in the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you.
We also beat back a mine with the Ho-Chunk Nation, too, just recently with that organization. We actually won that battle in court already. So let's win some more.
Kurt?
Yeah, so I believe that the DNR should be fully funded, and I actually have a plan when we request the first budget, and the governor asks for the first budget from the DNR, that we request a full rethink of the structure of the DNR so the new secretary can understand what capabilities they need, and they can develop a budget from the ground up to enable a DNR that once again brings scientists back into the department. Why does it matter? I think everyone in this room knows, but I'll give you one example. When I was talking to a farmer the other day, and we know that the impact of runoff from fields and its impact on our rivers and streams and lakes. But what he mentioned to me was there is now, with climate change, the amount of rain and the 100-year rainstorms that are now coming every 3 years, the amount of erosion that's happening in our state is causing phosphates and phosphorus to enter into our water. And there's no one studying the impact of climate change and the impact of our rivers and streams leading to our lakes. So this is critical. And part of that recommendation is to make sure that we go to a prove-it model versus a back-end evaluation model. And you can talk to anyone around the state. We've seen what's happened when you go when you move away from a prove-it model, right? We have wells that have fecal matter in them. We have land that's being destroyed. And so I support an independent DNR that's fully funded and rebuilt to the specifications of a new secretary under a Democratic governor. Secondly, when it comes to mining, the reason why I talk about building a new economy in my campaign is for many of our communities in our state, they have no other option but to put a mine in the ground. Their economy is so decimated, these are some of the only options. I don't support mining in our state, but we have to have an option for those communities. What does a new economy look like in these small communities in our state? What does a new economy look like in large communities in our state? So we don't have to make these trade-offs. I believe economic development and environmental preservation can live side by side, and that's what I advocate for as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Kurt, you will go first on this question. Specific communities in our state experience much higher rates of gun crimes. Because people and businesses are more likely to leave high-crime neighborhoods, the community suffers doubly, losing loved ones and economic devastation. What proven tactics do you support to reduce gun violence?
So more broadly, when we talk about what's happening in communities across our state, if you look at the melting away of communities, whether it be here in Milwaukee or in northern parts of our state, it creates all sorts of social issues. We have not created a fair economy in our state, and it doesn't matter where you look. You can see it everywhere, and that has the ripple effects that we've seen in education and in crime and other situations in our society. So why I talk about building a new economy in our state is because building a strong and a fair economy deals with some of the systemic issues that we have. Now, when it comes to justice in our communities, we know what implicit and explicit bias looks like, and we have it. There's no doubt about it. And we need to be upfront about that and honest about it and talk about when violence happens, how are we evaluating that violence? We need to make sure that there are independent investigations for when we see gun violence in our neighborhoods, especially when they involve police officers. And so we have a series of proven tactics that we need to deploy, and this is one of the reasons why we need a new Democratic governor of the state of Wisconsin.
Mandela?
So I always make the point that communities or people who have at least a living wage job typically aren't going around committing gun crimes. And this is less about what I want to do as Lieutenant Governor and more about my track record, things that I have done as a person in an official capacity, as a legislator. And that's been introducing legislation for universal background checks, which is a no-brainer. Also, mandatory reporting for lost or stolen firearms, high-risk protection orders for people who seem like they may be a danger to themselves or their community. It's important to highlight a danger to themselves because of the rate of gun suicides in this nation. And also red flag law. So if a person is going to purchase a firearm, does not pass a background check, and then says, well, I'm going to try to go buy a gun somewhere else. Maybe that was a fluke. And when they get to that other place, there's going to be a red flag for law enforcement because obviously if you didn't pass the first background check, you're probably up to something that you shouldn't be doing anyway. And so throughout my time, I've been on the steering committee for a group called American State Legislators for Gun Violence Prevention. It's the most syllables you'll ever hear. It's an awful acronym, but we did great work to work to prevent gun violence across this country. And we also have to be very proactive because there's this new threat of 3D printed guns. And the federal government has to get in front of that, but the state can also impose some regulation to make sure that people who definitely can't pass a background check can't just go home and print one because we are in a very dangerous place. There are already issues with, when you look at the level of poverty that exists in very dense communities, you're going to be subject to those issues. So there is a reason for economic empowerment in communities to prevent gun violence on the front end. But in the middle area, we have to make sure that guns are not continuing to get into the hands of the wrong people.
Follow-up question, Kurt. You talked about the impact of implicit bias and the racial disparities that we face, specifically in urban communities. We know that Milwaukee is obviously one of the leaders in the country as far as racial disparities are concerned. And we know the statement of poverty equates crime, right? But we know that there are many people who believe for some reason that crime equates poverty. So my question would be, when we're discussing these racial disparities that exist within the state of Wisconsin, what would be, well, first, would you be the candidate to really address and speak directly to the existence of racial disparities within the state of Wisconsin, specifically in Milwaukee? And also, what are some strategies that you would be willing to do to address those racial disparities so that communities of color can have access to equitable opportunities as everyone else?
Yeah, so yes is the answer to the first question. Talking about racial disparities in our state has to happen in all 72 counties because we are all Wisconsinites and we all need to thrive. And so that conversation is a conversation we need to have everywhere. Secondly, I'm not talking about just talking about how we solve these problems. We've developed specific plans on how we build a new economy in our state to address the economic and opportunity gaps that we have in specific communities around our state. So as we talk about building neighborhood economies again in our state, access to capital, access to health care, access to daycare. These are all challenges that are in front of our Wisconsinites today, but especially in some of the neighborhoods that have been and communities that have had the hardest economic time over the last decades and generations for that matter. And so when I talk about building a culture of entrepreneurship in the state of Wisconsin, I talk about building it in places where we need it the most. And that starts in small towns in northern Wisconsin that have melted away and in neighborhoods and communities right here in Milwaukee and Madison and all over our state.
Mandela?
So a big thing that I usually see on the news when there is some sort of job creation, it's always, no offense to my Waukesha friends who are in here, but so much of the job growth happens outside of Milwaukee and certainly outside of the central city. And what existed, like I said, from my grandfather, from my father, is not there anymore. And that's why we have to invest in what's working right now. And across this country, renewable energy, that's where the job growth is happening. That's where it's taking place. It's outpacing the rest of the economy. And equity is good for growth. And it also takes having people in positions of power that understand that there is not any one group that can be left behind in your state and in your community, and you're able to expect the whole, the greater body to be able to be successful. You're only as strong as the weakest link. So if you neglect any racial minority, if you neglect any social minority, you're going to have a problem with the rest of your economy. And that's why our middle class is falling quicker than most other states in the country right now. That's why Wisconsin is lagging the Midwest in job growth. And the governor talks about a low unemployment rate. The unfortunate thing is that there are more people working for much less because our poverty rate is at 12%. And it's being concentrated in very specific areas. So first, you have to have leaders that understand it. And I am a person who's lived it. And I talk about being a victim of this economy because there was a time where I was laid off from a job where my job was to help people find jobs. So I know firsthand what we're dealing with in this state. And that's why I'm so committed to addressing this and working to solve this disparity.
Thank you, Before we continue, there are seats in the front for those who may be having trouble hearing. We have plenty of seats available, so we can fill in so that maybe that can be an opportunity to hear more clearly. Next question, Mandela, you will start with this one. How would you improve public education in Wisconsin? And this is a two-part question. Do you support initiatives such as community schools?
Yeah, so I said a little bit in my intro, and I may have spoken a little bit too long about it, but the fact is, again, there is no such thing as failed schools, only failed communities. And there was a time where there was one of the many versions of school takeover legislation that was coming through the legislature, and I was going to a rally at one of these schools, and I walked in the neighborhood for a while, and I came across I came across a block that had maybe 2 or 3 houses that was not boarded up. And so you think to yourself, all right, well, if this is the living condition of this neighborhood, how do we expect the school to be any different from this? And you look at outcomes, and I'll use Madison, for example. They have like a 60% graduation for black students, and their poverty rate is 40% for black students, which means that the 60% of students that aren't living in poverty are most likely the 60% of students that are graduating. So as long as we have this inequality that we talked about before, it's going to be reflected in educational outcomes. So we have to first make sure that students are going to school on level playing field. It means that we address the homeless rate of students in Milwaukee Public Schools, which is 1 in 19. So if you have 6% of students who show up to school at a significant disadvantage relative to their counterparts, you can only expect the worst in education, unfortunately. So I do fully support the community school model. I was the author of the community school legislation because we have to address before and after school. Much of a child's educational outcome is dictated when they're not in the school building.
Thank you. Kurt?
Yeah, this is an area, if you go to our website, kurtforwisconsin.com, where we have a very detailed plan on what I can do as Lieutenant Governor to help transform education in our state. And it starts with a fair funding model. We need, through our budgeting process, once again, to make education our #1 priority. And that means that we have a fair funding model that provides consistency to school districts and schools from year to year, so teachers and administrators can focus on teaching and not budgeting. So that's the first part of our plan. The second part is to make sure that every family has access to free pre-K education. We know the impact in a child's life with pre-K education. We know that the impact that it has on families and economic opportunity. It makes sense for our state, and we need to make that a priority in our next state budget. Third is we need to let teachers teach again. We have loaded down teachers with 25 different initiatives every year, and they have less time to spend with students working through specific issues and enabling one-to-one learning. And we can do that by changing the way we assess students and moving away from more standardized tests and moving to more meaningful portfolio assessments. So we can see the real impact for every child and allow them to follow their dream, not a pre-prescribed test dream that's laid out. And then finally, we need to make sure that we enable lifelong learning. The world is changing really fast, and yet we have these systems, these separate systems from one another, and as a student, it's tough to figure out how do you get in and out of those systems, whether it be the high school or the technical colleges or the universities. We need to be student-centric in our state, and I will advocate for enabling seamless lifelong learning and making sure that our systems are connected and working with each other so it's focused around students and families, not around the system that's in place. And finally, when it comes to community schools, I firmly believe in community schools because I believe that the best answers to almost any issue are closest to where the problems and the opportunities exist. And today we've tried to centralize too many decisions when it comes to education. People in communities have the answers. Teachers have answers. Students and families have the answers of what education should look like, and we should empower and enable them to be able to make those decisions.
Thank you. Kurt, you will answer this question first. Do you pledge to refuse donations and/or endorsements from the gun industry and gun lobbyists?
Yes. So I'm proud to be a Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate. I am a no NRA money candidate. I will refuse those dollars now. I will refuse those dollars when I'm the candidate for Lieutenant Governor for the party, and I will refuse them throughout my career because this is the corrupting influence on our politics today. The money from the NRA, the money from these massive corporations is corrupting our politics. And so you'll also find me to be an advocate for campaign finance reform, to take dollars out of the equation so every person that is qualified and is able to run for office can do so. I believe that every person in the United States and every person in our state should have the ability to run for public office.
Andela?
Thank you. I hope we'll come back to the money in politics question. But to start out, I will say that yes, I will absolutely reject money from the NRA or the gun lobby, any gun lobby. It's not just the NRA. There are a number of other gun organizations that are equally or as bad. There's actually some that are worse. So I will absolutely reject that money, and I think I was the first in this campaign to do so. And I am also a Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate of distinction. But the real distinction is that I am the candidate that has received an F from the NRA already.
All right.
2 Fs, actually.
All right, you failed with flying colors here. Okay.
Failing proudly.
All right. Mandela, you
Yes.
first for this one. How will you solve the student debt crisis in Wisconsin?
Yep. So I was a sponsor of the higher ed lower debt bill in the state. And one of the biggest things that we can do, the best way we can provide opportunity and attract new talent and also build an economy here in the state of Wisconsin is to allow people to refinance their debt. And I make it very clear that I believe that people in the state of Wisconsin should be able to borrow at the same rate that big banks get to borrow money. Because that is how we make our society more equitable, more just, and more fair, and level the playing field for people who don't always have access to education. Money should never be a barrier to someone getting into school or learning things in any civil society. It's a shame that we're at this place right now. And, I also believe in free 2-year college as well for students. I actually believe in a path towards free 4-year education. It's going to take a while to get there. You can't do that overnight. But I do support getting us on that path as a state.
Kurt?
Yeah, first of all, I think people are familiar with the UW Credit Union, and this is an amazing mechanism we have in our state. And when we talk about refinancing, which I support, of student loans, we actually have a mechanism in our state to do that, and that's the UW Credit Union. Now, we don't own it, right? The state doesn't own the UW Credit Union, but it is unique to Wisconsin. And credit unions, all the credit unions here, almost all of them are based in the state of Wisconsin. So we have the opportunity to solve this problem here in the state of Wisconsin if we don't solve it federally, and there are ways we can manage that through the state budget process. Now, when it comes to student loan immediate steps, in addition to trying to solve how we allow students to refinance debt, I have a specific plan, and a part of what we're talking about in our Culture of Entrepreneurship initiative, which is to allow any student who's graduated in a STEAM discipline a $10,000 tax credit every year for 4 years to encourage them to stay here in the state of Wisconsin. But secondly, for anyone that decides to leave their job and start a new organization or business, we're going to defer payments for student loans to enable people to go jump off and do that. We know that health care and student loan debt are two of the biggest barriers for individuals jumping off and trying something new. So let's take those things off the table. And so that's what some of the specific plans I'll bring to life when I'm Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Kurt? USA Today and Kit Limger have ranked Wisconsin in the top 10 most expensive and least attractive states for retirees. I know you cannot do anything about the weather, but what can be done to make it more affordable for retirees to stay in Wisconsin instead of moving to Florida, Arizona, etc.?
Yeah, this is particularly important to me as my mother is retired, and we talk about this topic on a pretty regular basis. And, one of the things that comes with a state when it starts to grow again is property values go up. And so I think we need to understand when a retiree is in a home that they're paying property taxes on, how we make sure that there's consistency in what individuals pay for property taxes after they retire. The second thing is we need to look at the taxes and how we tax individuals with their retirement accounts. Wisconsin doesn't have a particularly favorable tax rate for folks that have moved into retirement. And so we need to look at targeted tax changes in order to make it more attractive for folks to stay here. And then finally, and this is one of the reasons why I talk about entrepreneurship so much, is Wisconsin is one of 10 states that has more older people than younger people. And that is both a challenge fiscally, but it's also a huge opportunity. What state can innovate the idea of aging in place, right? Wisconsin is uniquely positioned to figure out how do we enable more telemedicine across our state? How do we enable grocery delivery across our state? All of these critical services that people need when they're retired require innovation and require new solutions. And we can take advantage of that opportunity by keeping our kids here and enabling them to help innovate to allow individuals to age in place.
Thank you. Mandela?
Aging populations are often dependent on a lot of prescription drugs. And the cost of prescription drugs is through the roof. And it's one of the main drivers of the cost of overall health care in the state of Wisconsin. And that's why we need to be bold and take on these large drug companies for price gouging, because that's what they've been doing. They've been getting away with it for a very long time. So one, we have to be strict, again, on large companies who have been getting over on our aging population, everybody in general, but older adults in the state of Wisconsin often feel it the worst. And for retirement, Wisconsin fortunately does, one thing we do right is our retirement system. Our state of Wisconsin, the WRS system is very strong. It's one of the strongest in the nation. And I believe that we should allow some private employees to be able to pay into that retirement system so that there's more money in the pool. And then, we can have more secure retirement outcomes for people. And again, this is something that drives down costs. If we drive down the cost of health insurance, people will be able to have more money to pump into the economy. And that's one reason why it is very unaffordable for people in the state of Wisconsin. Again, it goes back to the Medicaid expansion as well. If we took that money, on the whole, health insurance costs would be much lower. I mean, that's a big piece of retirement spending.
Thank you. Mandela, this question is for you first. In Wisconsin, more than half of all suicides involve guns. Would you support a law to create a lethal violence protective order that would put in place a system to allow a judge to order someone who is at risk of harming themselves or others to relinquish all firearms until the crisis has passed?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I was able to answer before being asked. So if I could use some time to do my intro all over again now.
Well, we said time to fit it in, so you can go ahead.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Again, this is something that would have prevented the YouTube shooting and a lot of other shootings across this country because the woman who carried out that shooting, her father saw the warning signs. Her father approached law enforcement, and they were unable to do anything about it. So there are lives that could potentially be saved if we were to put a high-risk protection order in place in the state of Wisconsin. Again, it's a piece of legislation that I was proud to support when the time called for it, when I was actually in a position to do so. It's something I'll be more than happy to get behind again. And I know they do that in California. I think that was the model that we actually used for this piece of legislation, right in California.
Kurt?
Yeah, so first of all, yes, I would support such a law, but here's the thing. I think here's what the broader question we should be talking about, which is how do we address, the overall gun violence epidemic in our country? And I look at this much like the automobile tragedies that we experienced 50 years ago in our country. We lost tens of thousands of Americans due to auto accidents, and we said we are sick and tired of losing our children and our grandchildren and our grandparents and our husbands and wives. And we said everything needs to be on the table. We're going to look at how we design roads. We're going to look at how we design cars. We're going to look at how we license people. And we did that over this 50-year period of time and drove over a 75% reduction in highway and road deaths in our country. And we need to take the same approach to gun violence in our country. We need to look at where the deaths happen and then look at every option on the table. And guess what? Today, people can still drive a semi, but they have to have a CDL license in order to do so, right? And there are certain weapons that people should have a certain license to have. I would argue every weapon should have a license. And there are certain things that just aren't on the road today, right? We don't have tanks on the road. We certainly shouldn't have automatic weapons in our communities.
Thank you. Kurt, this is for you. This is a two-part question. First part is, do you support the legalization of marijuana? And second, when Wisconsin starts to profit from the legalization of marijuana, if legalized, what will happen to those who are imprisoned for it? Keep in mind that 90% of our prisoners are in prison for nonviolent drug offenses, and the majority of those offenses are marijuana-based.
Yeah, so I support the legalization of marijuana both for medical and recreational purposes. I believe we need to legalize it, we need to regulate it, of course, and tax it appropriately. But then we have to turn our attention to who we put in prison. And by the way, I don't think the two are tied necessarily. We should look at what it's going to take, and I support Matt Flynn in his proposal on this, to release from prison any nonviolent offenders. And by the way, we need to treat health problems like the health problems they are. When we have addictions to substances that have been designed for that purpose, we need to make sure that we're treating healthcare as healthcare issues, not putting people in prison as a result of it.
Thank you. Mandela?
Yep. So I think it's definitely tied to the earlier question about inequality because we have a 5-to-1 arrest disparity between black people who are arrested in possession of marijuana relative to their white counterparts. So yes, I do support legalization. I was, again, another piece of legislation I was proud to be a sponsor of. And I absolutely think that anyone who is in prison for a marijuana offense should be let out. And not only should they be let out in the case, in the instance of us legalizing marijuana in the state, they should also have first dibs at jobs in that industry because they've been left behind for a real long time. And that's the way we get real justice.
You get no argument from me. Mandela, this question is for you. What is your position on criminal justice and sentencing reform?
Yep. So, as you know, Governor Doyle made steps to, allow people to be released early. Governor Walker got in office, and that ended. His time in the legislature, his hallmark achievement was truth in sentencing. So we have a very anti-justice administration right now, and our prison population at between 22 and 24,000 on any given day is just out of control. It's, again, twice as many people as Minnesota locks up, and we spend $1.5 billion to do it. So many people who are in prison are there on or drug offenses, and there are also so many people who are locked up as a result of mental health issues that go unaddressed. And those people could be better served at a much lower cost if we address those issues rather than to put them into prison, because when they go to prison as a nonviolent offender, when they go to prison as a person with mental health issues, when they come out, because not everybody that goes to prison stays there. Most people, the overwhelming majority of people who go to prison will have a release date. And when they go in as nonviolent offenders and as people who have mental health issues, when they return, they are far worse off. And we also have to create a pathway so that there's real rehabilitation, so that we're not just dropping off people and giving them a bus ticket. I talked to a young man who was he was actually in Dane County Correctional at the time, and he was previously at Lincoln Hills. And when they let him out, he had a bus ticket. And he said, Mandela, as soon as I got out, I knew that I was going back in because there was no plan for him. So we have to reduce our prison population through treatment, alternative diversionary programs, work that I was proud to be a part of as the organizer for MICA, and also we have to have the conversation about recidivism, because there are so many people who are revoked, people who are out on extended supervision who end up back in prison as a result of no new crime, a technical violation. They may have been caught with marijuana, and they end up having to go back to prison at a price tag of $30,000 on average. And I want to say in 2016, we had nearly 5,000 people who had to return. That's a price tag of $150 million. I would rather send them to school or a job training program. I had stop sign, so I had to speed that up. Sorry.
Kurt?
Yeah, so this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. We need to treat health problems as the health problems they are. And by the way, when we do that, we can wipe away the racism that's built into our laws today. We know what sentences look like for different substances, and they're not that different from one another. So we need to tackle that head on. Secondly, we need to make sure that people aren't getting pled into prison, right? We see in our justice system today that people are getting pled into prison systems because we haven't funded adequate resources to make sure that people have fair representation and that we have enough judges in the system to take care of the caseload. And finally, we need to move to a restorative approach in our prison system today. To Mandela's point earlier about people getting out of prison and having a bus ticket, we have the solutions, right? We know what these programs look like. And for people that are in prison and they're coming out of prison, we need to start that restoration process in prison, make sure prisons are safe and they're restorative, and that there are programs to allow people when they leave prison to be successful again. And that, by the way, that means banning the box on applications as well.
All right. Thank you, Kurt. This next question, Kurt, you will start. Simple question. What made you decide to run for lieutenant governor?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think we both probably have very good answers for this, but my answer is this. The state of Wisconsin that made me possible, the state of Wisconsin that made my family possible, is under attack today, has been for 8 years. And we are having a conversation that we shouldn't be having. It's time for a new conversation in our state. It's a time for us to talk about how we build strong communities again. And it's time for us to have that North Star in our conversations. When I go and sit down with a business leader and they say, well, I need a tax cut, I ask the question, how is that going to help build a stronger community? When they say, I need more regulation relief, I ask, how is that going to make a stronger community? When they say, I need a subsidy, I ask, how does that make our community stronger? We need to have this North Star when we start having our political conversations in our state. And if we have a North Star and we tell people what we're about, which is to build strong communities again, where every generation can live, work, and thrive, then that is the framework in which we will respond and talk about the governor's proposals. That is the framework in which we will frame new ideas. It was this conversation that we need to be having in our state, and that's why I decided to run for lieutenant governor. And the lieutenant governor's role is a role that can be shaped to be based on the person, right? And so not only is it about that conversation, but it's about the plan to make those strong communities happen again in our state. And that's my vision for the role of lieutenant governor, is to put it back to work and to make and help build strong communities across our state again.
Mandela?
Thank you. And for me, it's less about changing the conversation and more about changing the governor. And having served, in the legislature, and it has been a place where good ideas go to die. And there are so many thoughtful people who have actually been having that conversation about building strong communities. It's not something that has been ignored. Many people in this room have been a part of conversations about building stronger communities. We've all been there. We all want the same thing for the most part. But for me, running for lieutenant governor is more than just about running for this office. It's about making sure that we're electing good, strong candidates up and down the ballot. And that means that in districts that are very far from Milwaukee, areas that really have very little knowledge about what goes on here. It's about having talks with them and expressing that we have so much more in common. And the further I go in this state, the more that is apparent to so many people. And so for me, again, the unfinished work that I had in the legislature, the bills that did not see the light of day, the bills that didn't get a public hearing because of who controls the legislature, the bills that even if they got a public hearing would never be signed into the law because of the governor we have. That's why I'm running for lieutenant governor. I'm running because there is opportunity that has to be expanded across this state. We're a state of inequality, but we can change. We don't have to be that for much longer. And also, the ideas. It takes ideas. We don't just run off saying somebody else is bad. It's about talking about our plan and putting that plan into action, because it's more than about getting elected. It's about being effective. So yes, we have been having that conversation. And as a person who's actually lived in the state for the last 10 years, I have experienced it.
Right, given this next question is a follow-up question, we'll stay with the same order. So Kurt, you go first. As the two Democratic candidates for lieutenant governor, what sets you apart from your opponent?
Yeah, I think what you'll find in my candidacy is a candidate that has a proven track record of results. I want to put the lieutenant governor's office back to work again. I want to make real plans come to life, and I'm known for developing plans and making them come to life in any work that I've done, whether it be in the private sector, in nonprofits, or in education. When I was a student at UW Green Bay, I was the head of our Student Government Association, and we had a vision for our campus for it to be a full-fledged four-year university, and that meant building new facilities. And it was us as students that led the charge to raise the first $20 million of an overall $45 million budget to build those new facilities. But we did it by investing first, and then we went to the community, and then we went to the state legislature, and we got it done. And by the way, we had a Republican governor and a Republican assembly at the time, and we got that project done. And we had people like Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders come to UW Green Bay to speak at the Crest Center that we built. So when I talk about putting this office back to work, it is about stopping at nothing to make change happen. If we can't make it happen through the state legislature, we're going to do it through partnerships with organizations and foundations and local communities. We need our government, we need to take our government back, and we need to put it back to work again. And I have specific plans for the Lieutenant Governor's office, and I plan on doing that once I'm elected.
Thank you. Mandela?
Thank you. So I think the biggest difference is probably experience. I'm serving in private sector is much different. That experience, you can't run government like a business. I mean, we have a U.S. senator in Wisconsin whose only experience was the private sector. We have a president whose only experience was the private sector. And so having worked in government, having seen like the inner workings, the sausage-making process, also having the relationships that I've built. I've been endorsed, again, by about 29 out of 50 Democrats in the legislature, meaning that those relationships are going to be beneficial down the line if we want to get any sort of agenda passed. We have to have that happen, because there isn't always a rosy relationship between the executive branch and legislative branch, even if they are the same party. Mm-hmm. And also, I'm the only person who's actually voted against Scott Walker before. I have voting history in this state. And I appreciate everything you're saying, but it is a difference if you haven't been here living in the state to actually know what it means to see what the state was and what it became. I was here. I've walked lockstep with a lot of people in this room, whether the injustice was Act 10, or whether it was right to work, whether it was attack on defunding schools, whatever the case may have been. And it takes that sort of knowledge. It takes those real life experiences. We are building a broad coalition, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, to move this state forward. And I think we are the only campaign that's positioned to do that. We actually have talked about and been active on every campaign issue that I'm speaking about today. And I'm the only person that can say that. This is not a fallacy. There's some things, again, that I pull out of a hat and say, oh, well, maybe I should run on this issue. There aren't some things that a high-paid consultant told me to talk about. These are my real-world experience that I've dealt with my friends, my colleagues, neighbors, family members, and many people in this room.
Thank you. Mandela, this question is for you, and it is a two-part question. How can you change the current gerrymandering in Wisconsin, as well as how can you change the voting restrictions?
Yep. So as one of the very first pieces of legislation I ever signed on to was the nonpartisan redistricting model to move us towards a path that would provide some equity and representation because people don't get to pick their representatives get to pick them. And as long as it's like that, it's only going to be primary battles, meaning that's going to be a race to the most extreme, and to our detriment, that extreme has been to the right. And that is why we see this agenda that we could have never imagined come to fruition in the state of Wisconsin. And so I would absolutely support that nonpartisan model of redistricting. Prior to ever seeking public office, I worked with clergy leaders across the city to make sure that when voter ID was implemented, the very first time, before it was struck down, the very first time in recent history that we had voter ID, making sure that congregations were ready. There was one Sunday I called on pastors to just pause 1 second in the sermon, or one moment in the sermon, and ask if everyone had an ID, and to pull out that ID and to show that ID. And that's how we overcome some of this. When the laws are unjust, when the laws are in place that prohibit voting, it's up to the community to stand against that. And the only way we do that, again, is through organizing. And if we have a favorable legislature, if we have a favorable executive office, that changes. It should change overnight. I'm going to be committed to making sure it changes overnight. And I'm not, I don't want to be elected just to be buddy-buddy with the governor. I have no problem with challenging members of my own party. That's something I'm more than willing to do if it means advancing the community that I'm representing, which is the whole entire state of Wisconsin, in the event that I become the next lieutenant governor.
Thank you. Kurt?
Yeah, from my perspective, one vote suppressed is one vote too many. And so we need to eliminate any barriers to voting, and I have a proposal to get people that are 16 years old, kids that are 16 years old, on the path to registry when they turn 16 in our state. Secondly, we need to, when we take over, we need to make sure that we have a clear plan for what to solve for gerrymandering. I support an independent commission for gerrymandering, as do a lot of people in the Democratic Party. But this is another example of a conversation we need to have outside of the Capitol. We need to explain to our communities the impact, if they're not feeling it already, of what gerrymandering and voter suppression looks like in our state today. We aren't having this conversation broadly in our state. We may think we are, but when I talk to people about it across our state, it's not coming up. And people are not happy with the current state of our state and the way we're governing today. They see how the deck is stacked and how the Republican Party has created this reality. Well, we need people across the political spectrum to demand these changes of our legislators, in addition to working the halls of the Capitol, to make these things a reality. And that's work I'll do as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Kurt, this question is for you first. Would you support driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants in Wisconsin?
I do, and I've been working in my community in Sheboygan to make that happen. So we are working on a plan in Sheboygan to enable anyone who needs an ID and a driver's license to get it. We're working through the mechanics right now, what that looks like in Sheboygan, because it's an issue across our state. And so I do support it, and I believe, by the way, that when we talk about building a state for every one of us and every generation, that looks like every one of us and every generation. And we need to, once again, be a welcoming Wisconsin, and that means passing laws like a driver's license law. If it's not at the state level, then in communities across our state, and I'm committed to doing that work.
Mandela?
I got to just say that's not possible. You can't just have a driver's license law in one city, town, or village. That's not possible. And again, it takes the experience of being in government to actually know that that is not possible. And I was an author of, again, a sponsor of the driver's cards for undocumented residents. I got the press conference to prove it, and stood with VOSIS when we introduced that legislation. I want to say that was 2014 or 15. So very proud to continue that legacy, very proud to continue that work. It was something, again, the makeup of our legislature. Didn't even get a public hearing. It was, again, our governor. Even if we got a public hearing, it was something that would not have been signed into law, because we have a very extreme controlled government at this moment that would not like to see anything like that pass. I mean, driver cards for undocumented residents means safer roads. You have fewer people who will be involved in hit and runs, for instance. You have people who would have access to insurance, to car insurance, which is it's the law here in the state of Wisconsin. You got to have car insurance. So it's about making our community safer. It's about making our streets safer, and it's about making people feel included in a society, because we are very exclusionary in the state of Wisconsin right now. People don't feel like they belong.
Thank you. Mandela, this question's for you first. This topic is on public transportation. What are your ideas or strategies for resurrecting high-speed rail through Wisconsin and connecting to Chicago and Minneapolis via Madison?
Yeah, I hate to say that ship has sailed. If it means just begging at this point, high-speed rail is very important, and it is something that is unfortunately very far away from reality right now. I would love to see that happen. Governor Walker made one of the biggest mistakes before he even took office by turning down that money because there was job creation that is just gone, job opportunity that's just gone, access to high-paying jobs, getting people from one place to another, moving us into a society of the future. We're going to be left behind. There's so many other places across this country, and we've already been left behind economically, and this is just one more knock against us moving into the future. So we got to figure out whatever we can do to explore the option of that. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to make up stuff on this table because I don't know what those options are right now. But I am more than happy to figure that out. But I've been a strong proponent also of regional transit, which is important too. It's equally as important because as funding for public transit is decreased. The governor cut 20% in his first budget in 2011. So restoring that funding and exploring the option of making regional transit a possibility again. And I like to dump on the governor, but it wasn't a Republican governor that got rid of regional transit. That was almost possible. We almost had the KRM, if people remember, Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee. And that's something that could have made Foxconn possibly more palatable, because I know that people from this area would have equal access to those jobs at this point. People from Illinois have a better shot at getting those jobs. So while the conversation, I want to entertain it as much as possible about high-speed rail, because that is a passion. As many places I've traveled to, having seen the way that places are interconnected, I want to see it happen. But regional transit is the more likely option for us, and then possibly getting to that point if we change who the president is, who's also, when we get a president who's willing to deliver those funds to the state.
Thank you. Kurt?
Yeah, one of the things I would bring to the conversation in the budgeting process when we win and take over in January is to ask the Department of Transportation to develop in coordination with communities an intermodal transit plan for our state. We need to have an overall idea of what transit looks like in our state over the next decade and what the plan is to get there. And every mode of transportation should be part of that plan, whether it be rail, whether it be driverless cars, and any other form of transportation. We need to think about what the next decade looks like, plan for it, and then start funding it. And if trains are part of that plan, I would support it, because I think we have good ideas in communities around what's going to happen over the next decade. We need to bring those ideas together and then start talking about how we get people from place to place. And by the way, high-speed internet plays into that, right? Because high-speed internet, in a world where half of work is separated from location, is become a form of transit, right? Because half of the jobs require you to be connected to the internet because you're doing the work from home.
Thank you. Just a side note before we continue this conversation, you all have beautiful manuscript. But while saying that, could you please write a little more legibly so that I can read, so we can read these questions? We want to make sure that every question that hits this podium is read thoroughly and clearly. So if you could just make sure you write those questions as clearly as possible, that would be great. This question, Kurt, begin first. The amount of money candidates can receive from the wealthy and now corporations has increased the corruption in government exponentially. Would you favor a system of public financing of elections? And if so, how high a priority would you place on reforming money in politics? So Mandela, to your point, here we are. Kurt?
Yeah, so I do support full reformation of campaign finance in our state and in our country. I think the first step in that journey is transparency. Any dollar that's spent in the political realm should be a transparent dollar. We should know where it comes from and where it's going. Secondly, I do support a variety of options that help us get to the place where any Wisconsinite and any American can run for public office. And if that means looking at public financing of campaigns, I think it should be on the table. I think there are a lot of good ideas on how we fund campaigns in our state and in our country. And I think we should have a commission to do the work to understand what that looks like. And by the way, it may not happen overnight, but if we start making those choices in year 1, 2, 3, 5, we will get to that vision state eventually, where any Wisconsinite and any American can run for public office. Now, when it comes to accepting dollars in campaigns, look, I wouldn't take $1 if it wasn't required, right? But we have to communicate with voters in these campaigns. And I'm proud to say that we have raised money to communicate with voters. And we didn't use that money to just push to voters what I want to talk about. We listen to voters, and we are continuing to listen to voters to understand what are the issues in their community, what are the ideas in their community, and how do we bring those ideas to life, whether it be in the lieutenant governor's office, the governor's office, or other offices. Look, I think that people in our political system are fed up with Democrats and Republicans today. They are sick and tired of the partisan politics of our state, and they are looking for answers. This is our opportunity in 2018. We have the opportunity to change the conversation and bring people in the fold who have not been in our fold for decades. And my campaign aims to do that. And you'll see in my campaign, people have contributed to my campaign. They have contributed to campaigns all over the political spectrum, because what we represent in this campaign is a new conversation. And they have seen the partisan conversation in our state, and they don't want it. They want a new conversation.
Thank you. Mandela?
Yeah, there's a very corrupting influence of money in politics. We've seen that for a long time. We wouldn't be where we are in Wisconsin if it were not for the corrupting influence of money. I mean, you look at other countries, you get a certain amount of money, a certain amount of time to campaign. I would be more in favor of moving towards that political model of campaigning in Wisconsin. And, you know, I've raised money from grassroots donors. We're close to 1,000 individual donors. And, we should be very transparent, because there was a Republican mega donor that gave you $20,000. Now, $20,000 from one donor is a lot of money. That is a whole lot of money for one person. And you gave yourself $250,000 so far. $250,000. So if it takes $250,000, that means politics is not open for the average citizen. That means not anybody could just step up and run for lieutenant governor. If it takes $250,000 of personal wealth, how many of us will be left behind from the political process? So many of us. And so whether it's your own money, whether it's somebody else's money to the tune of 5 figures, we got to, from a personal standpoint, from a value standpoint, we should reject it. We should just say no.
Thank you.
Did you want to respond?
Sure.
I'm proud of the work we're doing in our campaign. I am proud of the fact that we are talking to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of voters in our state, and we are listening to them. We are listening to what's been happening in their communities. We are asking them what are the solutions they have in their communities. And we will bring those ideas and those problems to life when I become lieutenant governor. It takes money to communicate with people in our politics today, and I want that to go away as a barrier. But the reality is we have the systems we have today, and we have to work within those systems. And so in our campaign, what we decided was we were going to invest to make sure that we are communicating with voters and listening to voters and asking them what's happening in their community and what we can do about it when we are elected in November and in January.
People who buy elections are not accountable to the voters. They are rarely accountable to anybody. That is the point that has to be made. If you have it, fine. But if you don't have to rely on anybody, if you're not accountable to the public because you finance your own election, because you're in a better financial position to do so, what does that say? What have we become as a society? And that is just a point that has to be made, and it can't be stressed enough.
Thank you. So, Mandela, you will start on this question. The topic of this question is Act 10. What are your ideas or strategies for undoing the damage to unions via Act 10?
Yeah, it just means that we have to win this election, because it is a moot point if we don't win this election, and that's the very significant first step, winning. And after that, that's a conversation that has to take place. And we think about Act 10, right? It was to be very aggressive, because the unions we're talking about, the public sector unions, agreed to the concessions. It wasn't because it was going to cost more money. And we look at the result of that. We have teachers who are leaving the classroom faster than ever. We have, reduced quality of work because people don't have the job security. People aren't able to collectively bargain, aren't able to talk about their grievances that they have at work without fear of retaliation. And now it's extended to the private sector. So yeah, I mean, that is certainly a conversation that has to be had. It's certainly something that needs to happen, not just for political reasons, but just for reasons of keeping good, strong people in the workplace, in the private sector and in the public sector. We all depend on public sector services in this state. And I want somebody who is very happy and very comfortable in their work environment to carry out those services, to perform those services.
Thank you. Kurt?
Yeah, this Act 10 is very personal for me. My mother-in-law is a 30-year teacher in the Madison Public School District. My mom was a school secretary at Sheboygan South High. My father-in-law is a part of the Wisconsin retirement system. This is part of the reason why I'm running for lieutenant governor, because we have to change the conversation. And I support restoring the rights that were taken away by Act 10, but we need to go further. We are competing for talent across the globe in the state of Wisconsin and in our communities. And that talent needs to come to government jobs, needs to come to local municipalities, to state agencies. And so what I support is the Workforce Modernization Act, which I would propose as lieutenant governor, which looks at what does it take to be competitive in today's job market for us to attract and retain the best talent, whether it be in our schools or our technical colleges or universities or our local municipalities. And in that study, what we'll illustrate is we not only need to bring back collective bargaining, we need to look at health care benefits and retirement benefits, but what does job sharing look like? How do we create more flexibility for people to take sabbaticals? How do we enable tuition reimbursement? These are the kind of modern benefits that people expect when they go into the workforce. And our government employees who do all the hard lifting work in our communities need to have those kind of packages when they come to work.
Thank you. Kurt, this will be for you. With economic growth comes responsibilities. How would you address and correlate Wisconsin's poverty and issues emanating from it with economic growth and low unemployment?
Yeah, I always tell people, a lot of companies are following the rules, and that's part of the problem, right? The rules today are set up to favor these large corporations, and there's no mistake about it, right? They're the ones who are funding our politics today. They are funding to keep laws and to keep standards the way they are. And so what I support is in the state of Wisconsin, once again leading from a progressive place. And so I'll give you one example. As you look at some of the companies in our communities today that are changing hands, they may have been started by a family, and that family doesn't know what to do with the business, and they're moving to an employee share option plan. That allows the employees to take over ownership of that company. We need to also financially incent companies to give equity to their employees as part of their compensation. There are a variety of mechanisms that we need to change in our state to make our state to once again have families that have family-sustaining wages. And that's short-term compensation and hourly wages, and it's long-term compensation through equity in businesses or other forms of payment and health benefits and packages. So I will support, as part of a new economy in our state, re-looking at what compensation looks like. And by the way, that starts by making sure that we have a minimum wage that's $15, and that's indexed to the cost of living. So anyone that's working can provide for their family.
Thank you. Mandela?
So yes, corporations are funding our politics. That is the reality. And I support living wage jobs. First step to reducing inequality is increasing the minimum wage. But I support a path for Wisconsin to be the first guaranteed job state, like the Works Progress Act. I think that people who are willing and able to work should have a shot at getting a job, a living wage jobs. And when corporations begin to pay their fair share, that's how we begin to finance this sort of project. And that means we invest in a Green New Deal. Again, that is where the job growth is happening. Wisconsin can be one of the largest investors in renewable energy in the state. And all the money we put in, we'll get it right back because it's a technology that pays for itself over time. And that means investing in our infrastructure in a real way, not just our crumbling roads, which have to be invested in. I don't know if you saw, but at Mitchell Field, there were a few flights that had to be diverted because there were potholes on the runway. So we're at a point where our potholes are impacting air travel. That's how bad it is in the area. But we have to repair our crumbling infrastructure, and we also have to invest in multimodal transportation. Regional transit, big piece of that. And our green infrastructure has to be updated. Our public buildings could be retrofitted to run off renewable energy. And when we do that, that's a project that it can employ a lot of people, can generate money for us in the long run. So that is what I support. Getting Wisconsin to become a guaranteed job state where we not only provide the training, but the job opportunities for people who are willing and able to work. And again, I totally dismiss the unemployment number because it doesn't take into account the jobless number, the joblessness rate in the state of Wisconsin. There are many people who've given up looking altogether. There are many people who've fallen off the unemployment rolls who just aren't counted, who aren't factored in. And again, we'll also talk about the poverty rate, which I said once, I'll say it again. More people are working for much less in the state of Wisconsin right now. That's something that has to change.
Okay. We'll do one. So for the sake of time, we only have time for one question. And then each candidate will give 3 minutes for their closing statements. So the final question, we'll begin with you, Mandela. What does the freedom to thrive mean to you, and how does it relate to the Black community?
Yep, so it relates to, I'll say how it relates to my campaign. I'll start with that, how it relates to my campaign. My campaign is based off restoring and expanding opportunity. The freedom to thrive means that everyone in this state has an opportunity, has a shot at the middle class, has a shot at the American dream to surpass the middle class. I want you to go even further. It means that students have access to quality education, they have a strong public school in every neighborhood, every community, and it also means that we don't have to deal with a lot of societal barriers. It means that we shouldn't have to deal with the barriers to education that exist. There's no way we should be living in a state where children show up to school hungry. There's no way we should be living in a state where we have to deal with the poverty that we have, because ultimately that holds people back more than anything. I mean, you can talk about health care and how people have access to badger care, but the problem is if you have more than one child, if you're working more than one job, what is the likelihood that you're going to be able to even get your child to a doctor's appointment? And so what it means for the African American community, having, again, come from the middle of the 53206 zip code, it means that every child will have the same opportunities that I had, the children who are still there, growing up in that neighborhood, whether you're here or whether you're in Merrill, Wisconsin, whatever the case is, does not matter what your zip code. A quality public education, access to quality and affordable health care, and a protected environment, because environmental factors also play into a child's development. And we have to make Wisconsin a place that is more habitable, more equitable for our children. That's what the freedom to thrive means. It means that on day one, the day you come out of the womb, that you have everything you need to succeed. It means that access to education won't be limited to income barriers, won't be limited to economic barriers that exist. If you want it, you should be able to go and get it if you're going to work for it.
Thank you. Kurt?
Yeah, to me, the freedom to thrive is not being afraid to walk out your front door. It's sending your kid knowing that they're going to get the best education that's possible in the public school that your kid goes to. It means that you have so many opportunities for meaningful work in your community that you have to choose which one you want. It means that you're not scared to drink the water that comes out of your tap. These things are realities today, and this doesn't allow a community, it actually suppresses the community's ability to thrive in too many parts of our state today. And so one of the reasons why I talk about our state's progressive history is because these are the things that we tackled in our state's history. We didn't get it right. We're still on the trajectory to figure it out. But we need to get back on the path where we are investing in communities and families and individuals to make it possible when you walk out that front door or when you just sit in your living room, that you feel like you have every opportunity at your fingertip.
Thank you. And now for the final statements from each candidate, 3 minutes apiece. Kurt, you will begin.
Sounds good. Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Mandela for coming out tonight for tonight's forum. I want to thank all of the organizations that have us here tonight. There are so many that have worked to pull this event together and create awareness of it. I want to thank the UU for having us. I married into the UU family. I am a member of the United Church of Christ, but my wife is a member of the UU. And, I found tonight to be a good discussion on the realities of our society today. And I want to thank you for making that discussion possible. I want to just remind us why we're all here. We have been living in this reality for too long. And we have the opportunity today to change the conversation in our state. We have the opportunity to engage new people in the political process. We have an opportunity to show the country what a new kind of politics looks like, because we have seen what our reality is today, and we can be the antithesis to that. But in order to make that happen, what we need is to elect people to public office who have a proven track record of results, who have accomplished things across the spectrum, whether it be in business or nonprofits or in education or with the state legislature. We need people who have taken plans and made them come to reality. And what I bring in this race for lieutenant governor is a very clear plan for the role of lieutenant governor, one that brings together state agencies and nonprofits and foundations to get the work done that hasn't been done, not just over the last 8 years, but over generations in our state. I am committed to making this change happen, and we're not going to wait years and decades to make it happen. We're not going to wait for a Republican Assembly or a state Senate. The work begins now, and that is what you will get from me as your next lieutenant governor.
Thank you. Mandela.
Thank you so much. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you to everyone who put this event together. I think it was a great conversation. I think you've heard two very different approaches to government, and I do hope that mine is one that you'll support. So having, served in the legislature, I've seen the worst of what our state can be, but I know what better will be, because I've had the opportunity to travel to other states and work with legislators who've actually advanced expansion of healthcare, to work with states who've actually work to expand renewable energy production in their states. So what I bring to you is an experience like I won't say like no other, but it is a very unique experience. For too long, people have been left behind by politics, politicians, and government in general. When is the last time that you can say that someone from 53206 zip code had a chance to run for statewide office and share his story or her story in every part of the state, and have people understand it, and have people find something that they can relate to, and for it to resonate and work? It is the time that we have to think bigger, we have to think bolder. People are tired of milquetoast leadership. People have been victims of the status quo. But when we organize people across age lines, across cultural lines, across racial lines, when we come together, have real conversations, realize that we are more alike than we are different, that's when we begin to win. And it's not just a political conversation, it's a societal conversation, one that has to happen. Because if we only play along the lines of politics, we're going to lose every time. So that is why we're doing more than just organizing in every county. We're organizing in every community. Real people who have been impacted by the results of, or by what happens when corporations write the rules, by what happens when there's too much corrupting influence of money in politics. And as an organizer, I've demonstrated my commitment. As an elected official, I've demonstrated that commitment. After my time in the legislature, I continue to demonstrate that commitment, because Mandela Barnes is going to be here, whether I'm elected or not, working with you on these same issues. I'm the one that has proven, I'm the one who's actually been here to show you that this is what I am about, and I hope to have your confidence on August 14th, have your support to be the next lieutenant governor of this state, so that we can continue this, not just me. All of us together, we get elected, and we make sure that we're effective afterwards.
Round of applause for our two candidates, please. Thank you, Kirk and Mandela, for an excellent forum and informing the community. We would like to again thank the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee for donating this space for such an important conversation, as well as the sponsoring organizations who helped to put this forum together. Until next time, make sure you continue these conversations in your communities and your families, and we will see you at the polls August 14th.